Introducing Robert Gerbin, Vice President at Wells Fargo, a highly strategic, transformational, and experienced global HR and payroll leader with the experience of developing advanced global payroll solutions in total quality management, global regulatory compliance, audit readiness, and process excellence. Please welcome Robert Gerbin to present on the topic, Analyzing Models to Standardize, Simplify, and Streamline Global Payroll Operations.
Hi, welcome everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Okay, so I'm really excited to be speaking today, especially when I think about where we stand in the global payroll profession and where things are headed. A big thank you to Nyama, of course, for allowing me to speak, but just to have the opportunity to talk a little payroll with all of you out there, I'm really excited to share some of the topics that we'll be going over. And I know I'll be touching things at a very high level, but I know we'll be having some time to answer some questions, I think, in the opportunity they have for a question lounge afterwards. I won't go too much into my background. I think most importantly, the points that I always look at is I've been a payroll person of one, so I understand, running the payroll department with just one person. I've had the opportunity to both be in industry and also work in consulting. And really my passion right now is about when we look at innovation and we look at automation and where the industry is going as well. So you'll kind of see that in the topics that I have. Okay, so to get us started, when I was thinking about not just about models, global payroll service delivery models, and what does the future look, and we're going to touch on some of that. But I really thought about something at this time. What does it mean? Right? Where are we at? We're seeing progress made with automation, of course. We're seeing our vendors continue to evolve with the products. We're seeing organizations themselves, evolve. And I think one of the things that I thought about is thinking about, is this a watershed moment, in global payroll services, in its evolution? What's happening, and I think it's more than just this fourth industrial revolution, with automation and what comes. And I really thought about a statement or something that would hit home with that. And so I thought about this one with Henry Ford, the inventor of the Model T automobile, and he said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And what I think about this in the payroll world is, and should be, is that over time, the way or the determination of how well we've been doing have always been around payroll, maybe payroll accuracy, and of course, payroll timeliness. Also, you can think about making sure we make, liabilities, tax liabilities, reporting, et cetera. But when I asked about today in conversations of, well, where's payroll going? I think there's a lot of discussion more around the how, how are we executing to get those? We do know that the payroll industry and those professionals are very much focused on making sure that we do everything we can to make sure people are paid timely, and accurately. And so payroll accuracy has become a really, foundation, of what is success. But I think as we look into the future, I don't necessarily think that, payroll accuracy and timeliness is something that should, really think that it brings a reflection to all that's being done within, in the profession. I think it's a given. When someone asked me about what are some key metrics within, our industry, I said, well, I think in the past it's always been payroll accuracy and timeliness to some degree, but I think there's more than that. I think there's more when we move to the evolution of how we're looking at utilizing, automation. How are we seeing around the corner? How are we looking at aligning not only payroll operations with some of the advancements that are happening, of course, in the industry, and then of course what we've seen with COVID and how we've been, placed in the middle of that. We're going to talk about that in a second, but I really wanted to start us off here by thinking a little bit differently. And those that know me understand that I'm going to think a little bit different. And I think the fact is, it's just not about gross to net anymore. It's about supporting a business in a way that's just outside of paying people. And I want as leaders to think about that in that type of a thought process. To take this to the next level, when we think about COVID and we think about the impacts that payroll itself, global payroll has had, I know personally, just being in the middle of strategic conversations, but also tactical when we look at the asks around, from a timekeeping perspective. Do we have the right codes in place? Can we understand where our people are? And then when we're asked questions about tax credits or executive orders or things of that nature that really impact the business, just not running that, running payroll. I think this has been, and I'm going to say payroll found itself because this is what payroll operations have always done in providing, the assistance, just not in paying people. But I think right now, if an organization is not seeing how strategic payroll is in this time, I think maybe that's where the payroll organization has not maybe stepped up in its way to say, look, we are more than just paying individuals. I look at this slide and I think about all the different aspects of when we think of payroll or executing in this environment. I always say, do you want to talk payroll or do you want chit chat? And the fact is, there's more than that, of course, goes into just a gross to net calculation. We see the environment not only from, say, a geopolitical statute. We see the fact, more and more of the guidelines and controls around how we move information around the globe. When we look at the influences of where countries are either growing in their maturity level, from, say, for example, of what's being asked of organizations, from, say, tax reporting. And for large organizations that are looking, possibly having 40, 50, 70 countries, in their scope, how are we making sure that from a regulatory compliance nature, that's being taken care of? And I think this is where the strategic nature of payroll is really evolved. I think, and we're going to talk a little bit about, innovation and this fourth industrial revolution as we move forward. But when I asked the question, has recent events of COVID really demonstrated the ability for global payroll, right, to impact its business? I think it's a good question. I think it's a time to which have we really done enough in demonstrating, where the importance is placed from a strategic nature. And I'll think about something here. I'll give you something to think about here in just a second. But when we look at the type of questions or the escalations that are being asked with us in a time of COVID, when it's about, understanding where are our employees located at? Are we tracking their time the way that we should to be able to understand that? And then we look at the fact is, where are people located when they're moving in an event like this? It raises the whole new question of the controls outside of just maybe, executing. And so something that I thought about and through this process and how it aligns is really how strategic is payroll being viewed in an organization, not just maybe when there's, one-off events, but, on a day-to-day basis. And I think about, and something that comes to mind is where is the lead or maybe the top payroll person located within that organization, right? That person has the strategic aspects, that knowledge, right? Are they reporting directly, to maybe a C-suite executive, or are they, somewhere buried within the organization? I think the strategic nature of where we're going, if there was ever an opportunity, if to think about, well, does payroll need to be at the table kind of thing? I think that's conversations that's happened over the years. But I think the way that global payroll has been asked, especially with COVID, and an opportunity, or where there's an opportunity to where I say we just don't, I guess, survive, but we thrive in these types of situations, is about how strategic we are in moving forward. But I think most importantly, how does the organization view our strategic nature of, our global operating model? And I think that's something that's important to talk about right now. And that's, I'll go into some of the model details in a little bit here, but it's really the question I like to ask everyone, have you really thought about, the impacts that have come across, just not payroll, but when we think about HR and we think about, technology and corporate tax and what does this all mean in the shifting, just like the intro, the videos that occurred before this, it talked about a new way of thinking. I think that's an obvious thing, but what it means to us as leaders, what does that actually mean in how we run our business? And yes, we look at all these things that are kind of here on the slide, but I think now is more than ever is an opportunity to say, okay, how do we think about running our business different? What does that actually mean? Yes, it's about thinking out of the box, but where and how fast can we, help the business? How do we know when, they're just not just in times of crisis, but it's just not about, cranking out payroll one after another. And, how well are we looking at running our global operating models with an end-to-end focus? And I think that's something that we'll look at here in a second when we look at models. But when I think about the strategic nature, there's really, again, that shift of just not maybe in the past of it being, well, this is the data we got, and now this is the data we execute. I think the more and more, and I know this has happened in our areas, that when we look at the responsibility of paying employees and you look at maybe a net pay result, we think in the past, well, we really didn't have upstream knowledge about what was happening. How do we know that, the person's compensation or their benefits was correct? We're calculating this and making sure that's correct. I don't think that's the way for us to look at this anymore. And quite frankly, I think that we're going to have to put measures in place to use automation, that when we look at someone's net pay, do we really know that is this accurate? Do we know that we have utilizing technology that, and it's just more than say RPA and things like that, but, do we know that someone's gross pay is what it's supposed to be, right? Are we utilizing multiple data points up front before running, that gross to net calc? That really means when we look at the net pay, is that correct? When we think at mitigating risk, is just hugely important. I think we all know in the payroll industry, the fact is there's probably a lot of fires that are put out, but when we look at payroll accuracy, we usually see 99.99%, but the team has just, gone through a lot just to make that happen. Well, that means there's risk. And I think what we're seeing now, or at least what I'm seeing in the future, especially with the, with innovation coming on board, is I think we need to understand how to mitigate that risk, but how do we incorporate that in more of a, end-to-end, focus? So, I really wanted people to think about not just getting through COVID and understanding we want to get back, to somewhat maybe what normality is, but I think there's more that we can do. Now, when I think about solving for the complexities of, global payroll service delivery, and I know there's quite a bit on the chart here, but if you really think about the influencing factors that are driving towards new approaches, and I think this is what's really important. Yes, I've got a few bullet points here, and we could probably spend with the people that are on this, viewing this, that we could probably go a day or so of really going into more details about what's here. But I think most important, and those are the ones that I've highlighted right off the bat, is reducing the manual processes and standardizations, right? With a focus of end-to-end workflows. That's something that needs to be taken into consideration. The work that's usually done in silos, again, whether that's compensation, whether that's HR, whether that's part of technology, right? Time, corporate tax, mobility. We look at things, for example, I think a really good example is when we look at short-term business travel, or we look at areas of, permanent establishment issues across the globe. For us, it's really looking at, in that situation, if someone's going to travel, well, they're going to maybe travel for business to meet a new client and understand what does that mean, for running a business. That doesn't necessarily mean that, payroll starting to get involved, but it's a way to be looking upstream to understand, well, what does that travel mean from a taxation standpoint? What type of technology or what type of, employee experiences do we need to let people know, as they move into the future that, hey, if you travel, you could be, becoming more liable for reporting. And plus from a taxation or permanent establishment issue, I think if you look at that example, it's more of an end-to-end approach than maybe what we've seen in the past. about, okay, well, I know someone's traveling. I need to make sure they're taxed appropriately, or correctly. But it's looking the end to end. I was just using that one as an example because I think it comes from the fact it starts from travel or a business team and goes all the way through to reporting. And the importance that there needs to be increasing the speed to mitigate in global compliance. I think this is going to be another key factor, a key metric as we move into the future. I know it is for me, is really the speed to mitigate. I think in years past, or you see any survey that comes out, usually number one is, things that keep us up at night or global compliance. I think that used to be the problem in the past because we just couldn't get visibility. But I think there's tons of resources now that allow us to see into these countries, whether it's the alerts that come or this type of information that comes about compliance updates, and we work with our vendors. I think now it's not so much about becoming aware of those, but it's how fast can we mitigate it? How quickly do we know that, is this an issue or is it not? And then how quickly can we get to impacting how or where our risk posture, our risk position lies, and making sure the system is configured the way that it should. And I think that's a great example of where innovation will start to lead us into automation. So I think that's something to look forward to. And then I think from a global standpoint, from a complexity of service delivery models, when we look at what are we trying to do, and I think global reporting is something that we all can share. Sometimes a challenge with, even with a headcount report, right, of 70 countries. How do we know? Because we know in most cases, those payrolls that are located in countries, the system of record is usually the payroll system, where I think there's more of a move to, and we'll see here, that unified payroll platform, but where the integration between core HCM is now running side by side instead of the need for duplicate entries, right? So the data should be getting a lot better. When I look at the actual levers of a service delivery, and the kind of the three ones I think about is, yes, you have local payroll vendors, and I think that's going to really fit best with organizations that's got some of those lower head counts, and maybe they've got one or two people here or there. But it's really the simplified version of understanding, I'm not getting too complex, but I have to really have that local payroll knowledge. And that might come with an accounting firm or even some of our, payroll vendors that can make that happen. But that's based on, where an organization is. And then I'll skip payroll aggregators for a second into what I think is more of the movement of the global unified payroll platform. And that's where things are moving. That's where their data is being taken from, those in-country providers, and they're moving them into the single platforms, mainly for reporting, but also for governance and oversight. But I think the key, and it's been this way for a while, I think even before global payroll was cool, I think people realized the need for saying, well, I've got, 80 different payroll providers across the globe. I've got to change this. I can't manage that. Especially from a governance perspective, and especially from reporting. And I think the payroll consolidation and payroll aggregation has been one of the, I think, number one key movements have there been in global payroll. And I think that's why you see that, within the various payroll providers, and reducing those vendors and those partners is really key, because I think before you can get to standardizing processes, and before you can get to greater maturity levels of, say from a compliance nature or from governance, correct? Or even gaining trust from different parts of the business, from around the world, you've got to be able to think about, how do I organize this group in a way that makes sense for me, right? And I think that's really key. Now, that's where we've gone in the past, but where I think now we're moving into the future, and that's really that emergence of global business services within this regional focused global service delivery model. And you see that you probably have a head of global payroll. They reside in some country. That's where the strategy and the governance is coming from. But also, I think to impact the way the regional service delivery capabilities, and of course into locals, I think we'll start to see this layer in. And what I see, these are the three areas that I think there are, and there's probably more to that because I broke these. I actually summarized these. But I think from a global service delivery model, start to think about global regulatory compliance as not just being something that maybe payroll service delivery models or managers have to handle out, among the countries, because we want them focused, on the customer and delivering payroll. But how can we get this type of a focus? I know we have a regulatory compliance team that I have, and it's really focused on making sure we're providing that layer of support, not only from the enterprise, but making sure that we're monitoring, but we're also making sure that are we doing what we should be doing. So I think this is something that regulatory compliance, as we move forward with automation, needs to be part of that global business service delivery. I think global quality and audit readiness is hugely important. The more and more our organizations are they're audited, testing and validation, not only from an internal, but we look from an external standpoint. What does that mean? And of course, data science, innovation, and advanced reporting. There needs to be a more focus on handling big data. How do we manage innovation and advanced reporting? So again, I think we could go more into this for the time we have. Now, how do we make that world a little smaller? And I did talk about the importance of global payroll consolidation. And I wanted to, there's of course a handful of things here that, stand out, but I think for someone who may not realize what does consolidation mean, in the sense of the global payroll engine itself and how has it evolved over the years, is one that's taking those local payrolls and they're moving it into an engine, that's starting to understand the complexities of regional and local impacts. The other aspect that it's really important, and I know there's going to be some topics on this later in the event with core HCM, right? How are we handling that master data? How are we handling those that indicative data? Is that quality, really high? Because I think, again, if we've got great data, right, we're most often going to have, great payroll results. And I think it's important to understand that the involvement of, say, some of the HCM models that we've seen today, really that allows a global service delivery model to really be configured in a way that more aligns to their risk and their the risk posture, rather than, I think there's a feeling that, well, we're going to be going to this new model, right? And then everything's going to be solved. Well, I think what we're seeing is the fact that the evolution and the advancements in innovation with automation in the sense of core HCM systems is allowing greater flexibility and the ease of those manual processes being eased out of the system, right? And there's more controls that are being built. The data is going to be a lot better, right? So the global engine or that payroll engine is going to produce those results. But I still think that even within a consolidated model, the global payroll model has to make sure it's checking that upstream data. And I think that's where automation is going to lead to. Of course, we know about the finance, the very fact that we impact the general ledger, we impact the reporting, that goes on with the organization is very important, right? So I think the more that the upstream areas that we work on, we understand that our finance and our global reporting is also going to get more advanced. So I think that's something important that you want to really think about models and third parties, of course, when we look at from maybe a benefit standpoint and compliance. I touched upon this, but I think more and more we're going to see that compliance is just not going to be something that individuals, managers out there are going to have to handle themselves. I think in a sense of peeking around the corner is very much where we see like a core HCM and an integration into it. We're going to see that from a compliance nature. The ability to use automation to understand what are the compliance requirements in various countries in an on-demand environment. How do we monitor that? And then how do we configure the payroll system to be in line with that risk posture as well? So I think we're going to see that in that consolidation aspect of this model, why it's so important that I think consolidation occurs. And yes, I think the feeling is there one provider that could handle everything? Well, I think in the past, there probably was the saying no, and maybe it's a little bit more tougher today because I always think about the business. So, but I think it's something that we want to continue to think about, about what type of model meets your needs. Okay, and I think the last thing that I really want to cover and give you something to ponder, I think there's some great data from the Deloitte Global Payroll Benchmarking Survey, especially in the sense of this next frontier, right? In this next generation of technology and where we're going to go. And you'll see here that I added a red box that went more horizontally. Maybe that's because I just like the red as well as the yellow, and the fact that I don't think in the way we're moving that, is it just going to be a sense of RPA? Is it just this sense of what does automation mean? And I think the engagement platform is really important, is how we take data and how do we utilize that data to impact our pay results. And most importantly, how does it impact running the business? The question that I have here, and I think this might be controversial to some degree maybe, and hopefully it is, but will advancements in cognitive automation eventually provide the foundation for the elimination of local influences and expertise within global service delivery models? So what I'm really saying is that, will we have to have the need for those in-country providers, those in-country expertise as we move forward in automation? Hopefully there's not a rise up against me with that. I'm just asking the question of, when we think about the type of models, from a centralized model or to a regional, and the fact that we need that local expertise in the area. And again, I'm not going to say it's a blanket. I think all organizations are different and they need to work that way. So I think it's just something to think about. I think the fact is the local influences of what we think about running our business and making sure we are compliant, right? What are those differences in one country to another? I think with this expandation, when we think of cognitive automation, what does that actually mean with artificial intelligence? It will tell us, just much like I think the growth in how we're going to manage global regulatory compliance in a state of just not monitoring, but inquiry and about validation, and how it impacts, how our payroll systems operate. I really think as we move into the future, we're not even close to where we're going to go, because the cognitive automation is going to be it's going to enable us to not only understand how we want to move forward, but it's going to be able to align itself with multiple data points, maybe within our payroll system, in our configuration system. And we might in one day be able to have an app that says, by the way, we have a new taxable fringe benefit in Argentina. I've already configured the system to take this and I've already tested it, and we're ready to go. Just let me know to make this happen. So I think that's the future, of where we want to go. In the sense of what I think something to ponder is, when we think about that, how we're going to use, automation. And I think, again, there's a lot more that we could talk about that, but I think those are the areas that, at least for me, I really love to think about. And so I think as we come out of the time that I have for this, I know people might have some questions. I welcome those. Like there's a lounge, I guess, question and answering that I'll be in next. So if people have questions, I really love to hear those. And I think those that know me know that I always like to end my my time with saying that payroll rocks. It's my way of bringing passion to what we do. And I think the last thing I want to say is that, I'm really proud to be part of this profession. I'm just proud of, the way that we have stepped up, in the sense of, not that we know that we can't step up. This is what we do. I know as a payroll manager, I've done payroll on Thanksgiving Day on the dinner table because it just had to get done. And this is what this profession does. I really do think there's that inherent trait of generosity of the payroll professional. And I'm really excited about where this profession is going into the future. So thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.